Thank you for that, and good afternoon to all of you. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to come and tell you something about the work of the London Ambulance Service. I'll start by talking more generally about the London Ambulance Service, and then talk specifically about some of the things that go on after dark, as it were, for the service. The service has been around in one form or another for around 100 years, and during the Second World War it relied heavily on volunteers, particularly female volunteers. A number of the ambulance people died during the bombings in London during the Second World War, and a number received bravery awards for the work they did at that time. In the 70s, that's not the 70s, is it? But in the 70s, the ambulance service became one ambulance service. It originally was split into local government areas. It was the LGC ambulance service, and in the 70s became one ambulance service for the whole of London. These are the ambulances that we most recently had in the late 80s and 90s, and were replaced in the last couple of years with the much more modern and European yellow ambulances, and they're very visible on the streets of the capital. In fact, I just come back from spending 3 weeks over in New Zealand on holiday in Auckland, and the ambulances in New Zealand are all white. I don't remember seeing one at all during that 3 weeks. Yet I saw quite a few fire engines that were red. So it's pretty obvious, I suppose. It's a bit sad, isn't it, go on holiday looking out for ambulances? But there we go. And these ambulances here, we're hoping to send half a dozen across to Mongolia as part of a charitable donation, and some of our staff and other colleagues are going to drive these across to Mongolia as a donation to the people in Mongolia, which is a good thing to do. The newer ones, and you can see over the years we've had a number of our staff, inevitably, because they're picking up hundreds of thousands of patients and putting them into the backs of ambulances, some large patients. Occasionally we have staff getting back injuries, and back injuries are not uncommon for the ambulance service. I'm pleased to say that our more recent ambulances, I haven't got a photo, we've now got hydraulic tail lifts and special beds which reduce the amount of lifting that our staff need to do, and therefore we've seen a reduction in the number of back injuries that our staff now get. As was mentioned, in 2005 the number of ambulance services, 2006 in fact, the number of ambulance services in England were reduced from 33 down to 11, or if you include the Isle of Wight, actually 12. And this is meant for much larger ambulance services, but you can see that the London Ambulance Service, whilst it's the busiest in the UK, is actually the smallest, apart from the Isle of Wight, geographically. But we've got the largest population, about 7.5 million people in London. You'll be aware, and you know, there's a strong view in London that as the capital city of our country, that we should have a world-class health service and we should have a world-class ambulance service. And of course our population has changed over the years and grown. And as I mentioned before, we are the busiest ambulance service in the UK. In fact, we believe we're the busiest ambulance service in the world. And it's partly because we're free. Where I spent big parts of my career, people get charged for the ambulance service. And that's resulted in less calls for the service than perhaps some other parts of the world where it's free. We're the only pan-London, or London-wide organisation, and this year we will receive 1.5 million 999 calls. I remember the Audit Commission did a report about 7 or 8 years ago saying that on average, the average person calls the ambulance service once every 16 years in their life. I'm just thinking about that for us, 1.5 million divided by 7.5 million, it's probably every 16 days, I think, for the LES. And we respond to 1 million calls. In fact, in the calendar year just finished, 2010, we responded to our 1,000th call on December the 28th, I think it was. And that's a huge number of calls, isn't it? 1 million. And we're now, obviously, one of the busiest emergency services. In fact, in England last month, the ambulance service did more calls than the police service for the first time ever in England. There's a number of reasons for that, perhaps, and I'll come on to that a bit later on. And of course, you might say, well, why do you get 1.5 million 999 calls but only respond to 1 million calls? Well, a number of reasons for that. One of them is because we get a number of multiple calls, and of course, with the introduction of mobile phones some years ago, in the old days, when you had a car accident, someone would try and find a phone box, and you might get 1 or 2 phone calls. And of course now if you get a car accident, you might get 20 or 30 or 40 calls to that from mobile phones. So we get a lot more multiple calls to incidents. And we all, am I speaking too fast? Are you okay? Everybody all right? Thank you very much. I do speak quite quickly apparently. And the other reason why we get more 999 calls is because people ring back. People are impatient at times. And of course if you're waiting 8, 9, 10 minutes for an ambulance and it's a serious incident, then that's a long time, isn't it? Our response time is 8 minutes. If we all sat here for 8 minutes in silence, that would seem like a long time. So we do get a lot of people ringing back to find out when the ambulance will arrive. Of the 1 million people, around 3/4 go to hospital, and some don't go to hospital because they've passed away when we arrive. Some refuse to go to hospital, and some, of course, don't need to go to hospital because we managed to treat them on the scene, and they're fine. We employ around 5,000 staff, and we have about 1,000 ambulances and vehicles. And over the past few years, we've seen our demand grow at about 5% per year. So we're increasingly getting more and more telephone calls for our services each year, and you can see our budget there. We've been very fortunate in the past decade, as have other parts of the NHS, in that we've had a large level of investment in our service. I think it's fair to say that certainly when I joined here some years ago, joined the ambulance service in London, we struggled to match. We struggled quite a lot with our vehicles and with our staffing. But I've been pleased to say in the past 10 years, and particularly the past 4 or 5 years, we've been given extra investment into our service. And in fact, in the past 3 years, we've recruited about 700 new staff to work on ambulances, which has been a good thing to do. And we've now got large numbers of staff in our organisation that we previously didn't have. There's London, and in all we have 70 ambulance stations across the capital. This highlights those main ambulance stations. So these are the main stations. We have 26 of those, but you can see we cover the whole of the M25 area. And as you'd expect, the central area is busier during the week, and as people spend more time outside London on the weekends, then during the day in particular, we get less work in central London during the day. On the weekend, it gets busier at night time as people come back into the capital. And interesting that most of our sicker patients tend to be on the outskirts, because we've got a more elderly population on the outskirts of London, particularly in South London. So we deal with numbers of types of patients, of course, as you'd expect. There's 1 million calls that we attend each year. We have some critically ill patients, and in fact, they only make up about 10% of our calls. I think there's a bit of a misconception that the ambulance service is constantly attending car crashes and all sorts of those sorts of calls and heart attacks, but actually most of our work is fairly what we would call routine work, patients who've got a problem but not necessarily a life-threatening problem. So of our 1 million calls, only around 10% of those calls are people who've actually got a life-threatening condition when we get there. But we do get those calls, and you can see there the numbers of different types of calls we go. And then, as I've mentioned, we do get lots of urgent calls where the patient may have something wrong with them that's serious. And of course, as you'd expect in London, we have lots of languages, we have a very diverse population, and it's not always easy on the end of a 999 call when something's going on. And people do panic and do get concerned, and often it's very hard to get the exact facts of what's actually happening at the scene, and therefore sometimes it's quite different when our staff get to the scene in terms of what's actually being told over the telephone. And then of course we have our non-emergency transport, which is mainly our minibus type transport. Our staff transport people to and from clinics, which is a separate piece of our activity altogether, and is not part of the 1 million calls. So this is what you expect the London Ambulance Service to attend, and it does form obviously a very important part of our work, and often time is of the essence for these calls. And we work very closely with the fire service and the police at these types of events. And then of course, as I mentioned, this is our patient transport service, where patients who've got required to go to clinics for hospital appointments, and we transport these patients to and from those clinics. And then we have the other types of calls where increasing numbers of alcohol related calls that we attend, particularly in the evenings and weekends, and these are tens of thousands of calls that we attend in London each year. We've been doing a lot of work with the police and with other parts of the NHS to try and make sure that these patients get dealt with properly. And I'll say a little more about that later on. So we want to be the world-class ambulance service for the capital, and we want our patients to be very satisfied with the service we give. As you'd expect in an organisation that attends 1 million calls, we don't always get it right, and not everyone's always happy with what we do, but by and large we get very, very positive feedback from patients, and in fact we enjoy the highest level of satisfaction from patients does the ambulance service in the NHS. I think last year we received about 1,200 letters and emails from staff, from patients who hadn't had the ambulance around to them, thanking us for our care and looking after patients. So our priorities are to deliver, obviously, to get to people quickly, particularly 999 calls who've got an urgent need. To try and find ways of taking patients who need treatment to other facilities rather than A&E departments. We've got 30 odd A&E departments across London. They get very busy, and it's not always appropriate for patients to sit and wait to be seen in A&E. It may be better to go to a walk-in centre, see their GP, or a mental health crisis team, a range of other NHS professionals they can be seen by. And so increasingly we're trying to encourage our staff and have the right support in the field for our staff to be able to transport patients who need to go to hospital to different facilities besides an A&E department. And of course, as we're all aware, the current economic climate means that we're having to be very careful and conscious about the costs of providing an ambulance service in the capital. And that's something we're having to concentrate fully on over the next 2 to 3 years. So we've got a national standard that's outlined by the government, by the Department of Health, and our calls are categorised into 3 types of categories, either A, B or C. So of those 1 million calls that we respond to each year, around 35% of those are classified as life-threatening. Now that might be different to what I said a few minutes ago, about 10%, but because we err on the side of safety, what happens when people ring 999, inevitably more calls get categorised as being serious, and that's a safety measure we have. So our requirement is to get to 75% of our category A patients, our life-threatening calls, in 8 minutes. And we do that. We've done that for the past 7 years. It's a tough target to hit, but we've done it for the past 7 years. And you can think about trying to drive around London with the congested traffic and some of the issues we face. We've had a difficult winter in London that makes it quite a challenge for us. But I'm pleased to say that we've done it for the past 7 years. Then we have the other patients who could be serious but aren't necessarily. We've got a 90-minute target. We've struggled more with that one, and we've been unsuccessful with hitting that target over the past few years. And then finally, patients who've got something that's not serious at all, and we can agree locally about how to treat those patients. A number of those patients get telephone advice. We can give advice over the telephone, and that's been very successful over the years. So I've already mentioned that. So our ambulance crews, they've got a little computer screen in all the ambulances and in our cars, and when the call comes in, we're able to give that call to the crew within 15 seconds. From the time the 999 call starts to the time the ambulance crew have got that on their screen in their cab can be as quick as 15 seconds. It's the fastest in the world, I think it is, in our ability to give the call, and that's fantastic. It's good. And they get the call given to them as either red, amber or green. In our attempts to get to patients more quickly, we dispatch our crews often with the address details only, which brings its own challenges. So we're sending our staff out sometimes with the address. They're heading the right direction to the call, and then subsequent information can come through which means the call isn't serious, so we cancel them down to the call. And that can be a bit frustrating for our staff at times when that happens, and we're trying to address that, but there's no easy fix to that. This is an example of what the ambulance crew have in their cab of their vehicles. It's a little computer screen, and they're able to find, they not only have got a navigation screen like we've seen now in cars, satellite navigation, but they're also able to put into their different places to get different destinations for patients. If they've had a stroke, where's the nearest stroke unit? If they've got some major trauma, so they've been in a very serious car accident, where's the nearest trauma centre, or where's the nearest minor injuries unit? And this is a very important piece of technology that our ambulance crews rely on. It gives them times, information about the patients, and it gives them information about the hospitals, and it shows them how to get to the scene without having to rely on map books. So this is a very important part of what we need in our ambulances to help speed up the calls. So we prioritise our calls, as I've said, in our control room. We use an international product called Priority Medical Dispatch System, and we are able to ensure that our control room staff, when the 999 call comes in, are able to find the right category of call for that patient. Or, often when the call comes in, it's often a relative ringing up or a friend, which means it even more difficult to get the right information at times. So this is our control room at Waterloo. This is the largest ambulance control room in Europe, and it handles the 1.5 million 999 calls that we get on Waterloo Road. And our 999 call takers do a fantastic job. On average, we answer the phone in 3 seconds. When someone rings 999, we answer the telephone within 3 seconds, which is fantastic. When I joined a few years ago and we were short of staff and money, it wasn't uncommon for the telephone to ring, the 999 call to ring for 2 minutes, and then an answer phone came on. And you'd say, like you do if you ring the gas company or the, which service would you like? Press 1 if you want an ambulance. I'm being a little bit flippant there, but it wasn't uncommon then for us to be so stretched that we weren't able to answer the calls so quickly. But I'm very pleased to say that we've got some really good people in our control room. We've been given extra funding, and we answer the telephone on average in 2 to 3 seconds every 999 call that comes in to our control room centre, which is very quick. How do we respond? Well, we obviously have around 480, I think it is, frontline ambulances, Mercedes ambulances. We have the HEMS, the emergency helicopter that's based at the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel, and we provide the paramedics, and the Royal London Hospital provides the pilot and other doctors to attend the scene, and this gets used between 3 and 4 times every day to attend major incidents or major issues that we attend. And it also relies on sponsorship. I was just saying earlier, this, as you can see, is sponsored by Virgin. This is not funded fully by the Department of Health, but does get some funding, and the rest of it comes from sponsorship and from donations. But does a great job, been around for many years, and supports us in our daily responses to patients across the capital city. And not easy. Think about trying to land. It's different, isn't it? Certainly where I work, must have spent most of my career in New Zealand. It's different landing a helicopter in rural parts of Northumbria or in Essex, or even in Norfolk. It's quite different landing a helicopter in Hyde Park or in Regent's Park or in Oxford Street or somewhere like that. So quite a challenge for the pilots involved and staff. And then we have cars. Increasingly we have a numbers of fast response cars. These are staffed by ambulance staff who respond to find out what's wrong, what's happened at the scene, and of course they're able to get through the traffic much more quickly because of the size. And we have around 150 of these cars around the capital city. We also have motorbikes, a number of motorbikes, and again based mainly in the centre of the city, very quick to get to the scene, do a great job, and provide care until additional help arrives at the scene. And we have got push bikes, which have been very, very helpful. We have these across the capital, and we have them at Heathrow. We have a number at Heathrow. As you can think of the size of the terminals at Heathrow, trying to get around Heathrow Airport in cars or on foot is quite difficult. So these do a great job at Heathrow Airport. But also in Leicester Square, we get a lot of people on weekends and during the week who've been drinking, collapse, fall over, and we are able to save one of the big ambulances and send one of our single response cycle units to go and look at what's going on. Often when we get to scenes, people have absconded from that, they've gone, they've left. Someone else has rung an ambulance because they've seen someone fall over or collapse. We get there's no one there. So what's good about having these people, having our cycle response unit, is they can go and they can cancel the ambulance and say, listen, there's no one here, or it's not serious. And so these do a great job too. And then of course we rely heavily on our control room staff at Waterloo Road. We have people who give telephone advice in our control room. They are paramedics or ambulance technicians who've been trained and are able to give advice to patients over the telephone. And that can often mean that we don't need to send an ambulance. So that's an important part of what we do. I've already mentioned earlier about our attempts to try and find the most appropriate care pathway for our patients. If you think about it, a lot of the patients we attend are elderly patients, and nearly half the patients that we take to hospital end up being admitted to hospital and spend 3 or 4 days in hospital. And that's not always necessarily the right thing for them. So the more we can find better pathways of care, more appropriate pathways of care, we believe that's better. and we've got evidence to show that. So whether we get a lot of people who've fallen over in the home. 60,000 of our calls are elderly fallers. A lot of those elderly fallers haven't got any injury, but they require some social care or some help. And we're able to try and improve that by getting falls teams to come and visit them, or district nurses. So we've got both ends of the spectrum. People who can be treated at home, people who can go to a minor injury unit, people who can go to A&E, and of course for the really serious and sick patients, people who can go to a trauma centre or a stroke unit and end up in an intensive care unit. So we do a full spectrum, and of course we do have quite a few babies born in ambulances as well. In fact, it was quite funny because I took my wife across to New Zealand. She'd never been before, and so I found myself telling her of all the calls I'd been to in Auckland. She got a bit bored with that for a few minutes. I remember, you'll get bored too, but I'll stop with one. We went across the Auckland Harbour Bridge. It's not quite as flash as the Sydney Harbour Bridge, but the Auckland Harbour Bridge, and we drove across there about 4 weeks ago. And I was retelling my wife about how I'd delivered a baby on top of the Harbour Bridge, and the husband was too frightened to come in the ambulance for some reason, so they forwarded in a taxi over the Harbour Bridge. And so we stopped the ambulance right on the top of the bridge, and the taxi was following, and we stopped. I remember delivering the baby and then opening the side of the door and shouting out, "It's a boy," and he was waving. It was quite as a huge traffic jam, but everyone was very happy. And the taxi driver seemed particularly happy that she hadn't had the baby in the taxi, so that was good. So we've come quite a long way as an ambulance service. There's still things to do. We're not perfect. There are areas of improvement, as in any organisation, but we have done some good things. And it's important that we do focus on the good and the not so good at times. We have hit our category A target. We don't spend more money than we get, which is important as an NHS organisation. We've saved lots of lives. I'll come on to that shortly. I've already mentioned our control room, which was recently awarded an excellence award for the fantastic job it does. And we've also done some work with a range of people, including some ethnic minority issues. We've been working with the Bangladeshi community. We've done a really good job with that community in East London. We've been working with rough sleepers in Ilford, and we've also had a number of our staff receive bravery awards for their fantastic efforts in saving lives. So we've got quite a few things that we can say we're proud of achieving, but there is more to do. We have seen survival rates improve. We have treated more patients outside hospital, and we have improved. We've had less complaints because we do get to people more quickly, and time is a very important thing for patients who call the ambulance service. They want a quick response. We've been taking patients now for 5 years who have a specific type of heart attack directly to a specialist centre, so they can have an angiogram and have, where necessary, have angioplasty. So people who've had a heart attack, a particular type of heart attack, our staff are able to look at, do a 12-lead ECG of the person's heart, find out whether they've had whether they've had a heart attack, and then if they have had a heart attack, we can then take them to what they call a heart attack centre directly, and they can have an angiogram literally within 15 minutes of us arriving. That's saved lots of time and improved lots of people's lives, rather than going to A&E, then doing another 12-lead ECG, and then transporting a patient to for an angiogram. This has been fantastic. So our staff are able to diagnose heart attacks at the scene, and then take patients directly to a angioplasty centre. And that's been good thing to do. In the old days, we used to, certainly where I used to work, and in some ambulance services, used to try and electronically send a copy of the ECG to a doctor in a hospital for them to interpret it to decide whether the person had a heart attack. We've cut that out, that process, and our staff do that themselves. And we know for a fact that that's saved lots of lives of people in London by them able to get angioplasty very, very quickly, within an hour of the ambulance being called, which is unbelievable. There is some confusion at times, and that's inevitable, between a heart attack and a cardiac arrest. Increasingly I find that the two get confused with each other. Does it matter? Perhaps it doesn't, but it's worth, for those colleagues in the room who don't understand the difference, just briefly touching on this. People have a heart attack, obviously part of their heart muscle dies, gets blocked, and so part of their heart dies. That's quite different get pain, and they can recover from that. A cardiac arrest is where someone actually dies or their heart stops completely for whatever reason. And in these cases, we have to provide full resuscitation to these calls. And we attend 9,000 cardiac arrests a year in London. So that's 30 a day. These are patients who've had a sudden cardiac arrest and for all intents and purposes are dead. And increasingly what we're trying to do is two things. One, get to these patients as quickly as we can, because that will help, because we provide care. Two, to try and give telephone advice. So someone rings in and says, my father's collapsed on the floor, he's not breathing, he hasn't got a pulse. For our 999 call takers to give telephone advice over the telephone to advise them how to do CPR. And we'd encourage colleagues in the room to learn at least the cardiac massage side of that. And that will really help. If someone has a collapse from a cardiac arrest and you can start the resuscitation immediately, the chances of survival are dramatically increased. And for every minute that goes by without some form of resuscitation, the chances of survival decrease quite dramatically. So in London, we've been working very hard, one, to get there more quickly, and single out these particular calls that we get and send send 2 or 3 vehicles as quickly as possible. Secondly, to give telephone advice, and thirdly, to encourage people to provide basic life support until the ambulance arrives. And you can see the red bar gives an example of how we've seen, for a specific type of cardiac arrest, these are people who've had a heart attack linked to had a cardiac arrest linked to a cardiac event, that we've had big increases in the number of people who've survived and walked out of hospital alive, which is fantastic. So last year, for example, 97 people who were technically had died were successfully resuscitated by London Ambulance staff with support from the public and people like London Underground as well, and were discharged alive from hospital, 97. Only 10 years ago that number was 17. So we've seen a big increase in the survival, and we're doing more and more to do that. And part of our efforts to improve cardiac arrest survival, to discharge, these are people who've walked out of hospital alive who otherwise wouldn't have. These are people who actually lives we've saved. To try and improve this, we've been putting defibrillators in lots of places around London. With the support from the Department of Health and the British Heart Foundation, we now have hundreds of defibrillators around the capital. We have 90 at Heathrow Airport alone. Victoria bus station, underground stations, train stations, and lots of the underground and transport staff have all been trained in the use of defibrillators, and they've saved lots of lives from that. I think we've saved 20 or 30 lives alone at Heathrow Airport. There's a bit of a joke, some people joke about it, they don't fall over at Heathrow Airport, because if someone sees you, they'll defibrillate you, even if you're not dead. So don't faint at Heathrow or at Victoria bus station. But we've had some fantastic stories of people in young age who've been successfully brought back to life by a combination of LAS staff and members of the public and underground staff and transport staff. So this is an important part of what we do, very important part of what we do. And we also have campaigns to try and encourage people who have chest pain, which could result, a heart attack could result in someone having a cardiac arrest if the heart muscle gets damaged, so the heart attack can lead to a cardiac arrest, the heart stopping. So we've had a number of campaigns. As you'd expect, you also get people ringing in with indigestion. When this, and the public are susceptible to these campaigns, as you'd expect. So when this first went live, I think we got an extra 50 calls a day. A number of them were for indigestion. What was quite interesting, potentially funny, see what you think, was that when this first ad came out, and these were on buses, on the underground, on a range of other places, the first set of ads had a leather belt around the chest. And they actually went to people, we got called to people's houses who had put a belt around their chests. Because they thought that was what they should do. I'm having a heart attack, I'll put a belt around my chest. And that's why they changed it, to put a skin-coloured belt on it so people wouldn't get confused. So we were about a stroke campaign. We're going to put belts around people's heads. But it does show you the power of advertising, and in fact, how that can influence what people do. So it's very important that you get the message right. And as I mentioned before, most of the cardiac arrests that we go to are at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. Now, whether that's a combination of people going to work and getting stressed out about the prospect of another heavy week on a Monday, Some of them have been there by themselves all weekend, and we found them on the Monday morning. But with most of our cardiac arrests are on a Monday morning between 8 and 9 a.m. And this is just some advertising that we've done about to try and encourage the public of London to be trained in basic resuscitation to save lives. Trauma. What is trauma? Well, trauma in this case is people who have something which is life-threatening that's resulted in a trauma. So you've been hit by a car, hit by a bus, you've been stabbed, you've been shot, something traumatic has happened. It's not a chest pain or a stroke, it's a trauma that affects your body. And as a result of that, increasing evidence shows that you need to go to somewhere that can provide instant treatment and surgery for that injury. It's an injury-related thing. So in London, a decision was taken a couple of years ago that we should, rather than take patients who've had some major trauma, someone who was literally dying, say they're being shot in the head, for example, and they're going to die unless they get immediate surgery. For those types of patients, or stabbed, or been run over, that those patients should go to a major trauma centre where you know you get high-level definitive care very, very quickly. So we're very supportive of this. This was a big decision to make for the capital city. Ambulance staff from around London, where we get a patient with major trauma, is now taken to one of those 4 centres and will bypass other A&E departments. And that's the right thing to do, and early evidence is showing that that's saving lives by taking patients to specialist centres who have major trauma. And so our staff make that decision based on the signs and symptoms of the patient's injury, and then transport them directly to those. And they're waiting for us when we get there. We've had some very good results with that. This is the first 3 months of the types of calls we went to last year with this new procedure. You can see that 19% of those were falls, 38% were road traffic accidents, a massive 27% were stabs or shot. This is inside the M25 in London, and 28 or 5% were assaults, and some other unknown ones. One of the unknown ones there was kicked by a cow, and the person suffered a major trauma. Now, inside, you wouldn't think in London, the capital city, you'd have people getting kicked by cows, would you? Another one involved someone in one of those mobility scooters that got involved in a serious car accident. So, you know, things do happen out of the ordinary. So this gives you a sense of the types of calls that we're attending where someone's got major trauma. Then we have stroke. This has been a big campaign. As you've seen, it's been around for 2 or 3 years now, but there's been a big campaign for people to try and have early recognition of stroke, and hence the FAST test. And this has been widely publicised on TV, radio, holdings, underground stations, and even some ambulances, as you can see here. And this test gives a good indicator as to whether someone's suffered a stroke. Very important. And often, it's 3, 4, 5 hours after the person's had a stroke before an ambulance is called. And what the advertising is aimed at doing is cutting that time down. Because if a person's had a stroke and they have a clot-related stroke, the sooner we can get that treated by giving them some clot-busting drugs, the biggest percentage of having full recovery almost from a stroke, which is unheard of really. So what we're keen to do is to make sure that if someone has a stroke, they call the ambulance straight away, and then we will respond in 8 minutes, and then we will transport these patients, to a hyperacute stroke centre. Much like the discussion a minute ago about the trauma patients, we now take patients who've had a fast positive stroke with symptoms within 3 hours. We will transport them directly to one of these 9 centres. Is there 9 on there? 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, yeah. We bypass the local hospital, and these patients will get an immediate CT scan, CAT scan on their brain, and if the person's had a thrombotic stroke and they've got a clot on the brain, then they can get thrombolyzed and get the clot dissolved. And it's been very successful. This has been going about a year as well, and we've seen some fantastic results. Here's a patient who is an example of a patient who had paralysis on one side and would potentially have spent the rest of his life in a care home or a nursing home, and is now at home able to play his accordion. And apparently he couldn't even play an accordion before he had the stroke. So there, but this has been very successful, and of course there are far more stroke patients than trauma patients. We have tens of thousands of patients have strokes. So this is a very important piece of work that we've been doing, and the hospital's done a fantastic job, and we've been supporting them with this. I think this is quite powerful, because actually you actually see the patient who would have otherwise had a very poor outcome almost fully recover, which is fantastic to see. Our current challenges are getting to patients in 8 minutes in the capital, busy, traffic, roadworks. They always seem to be repairing the Victorian, what's it called? Victorian water mains, gas mains. They always seem to be repairing them. As you might have seen, one little roadwork can have a massive impact for traffic. It's a big challenge. Other challenge is providing more care outside hospital for patients. So providing our staff with more training and support, so they feel confident to transport patients to other places besides A&E. We need to get a new computer system to replace our old 999 system, which is fairly old. And that's being replaced on the 8th of June 2011. We've got the big Olympics for the capital, which is a big thing for London Ambulance Service. It's the biggest event we've ever had. And dealing with demand on our service, which is increasing year on year. I've already mentioned each year. In England, there are 300 extra thousand calls a year, and it costs £200 on average to call an ambulance. So that's costing the NHS an extra £60 million a year by increasing use of the ambulance service. The top 10 types of calls that we attend, these are our staff writing on the patient report form. So these are the types of calls that we attend. As you can see, there's a huge range. Fractured alcohol, minor cuts and bruising, difficulty in breathing, no injury or illness, generally unwell. Should people who are generally unwell be calling a 999 emergency ambulance? We don't think so. But people often call us as a last resort when they think they've got nowhere else to go. It doesn't make it right, but that's what happens. And we have to find some way around of actually making sure the emergency ambulance service gets used for genuine emergencies, and other parts of the health service can pick that up. We don't get many hoax calls. We get quite a lot of inappropriate calls. We get very few hoax calls. Hoax call is a malicious call. The fire brigade get lots of hoax calls. I wonder why we don't get many. It's partly because it's pretty boring watching someone on a push bike arrive, isn't it? If a little kid calls, there's been a fire at a house and it's a malicious call, 3 fire engines arrive and 15 firefighters. That's quite exciting to watch. Someone's had an accident on Leicester Square and someone on a push bike's a bit boring, isn't it, for kids? Anyway, so we get very few hoax calls. I would say we get less than 0.5% of our calls are hoax calls, but probably 20 to 30% of our calls could be seen as inappropriate use of the ambulance service. And our staff get quite demoralised by that. They see themselves as highly trained professionals who are there to provide emergency life support. And at times, some of the calls that we get should be going to other parts of the NHS. If you've had a cold for 3 weeks, you shouldn't be calling an ambulance. I think one of my favourite ones was I can't dance, can I have an ambulance? Now, I can't dance, but I don't call an ambulance, but there we go. That would classify as a hoax call, I would say, a malicious call. So, the types of things that affect demand are, as you'd expect, seasons. We get more calls in winter, we get more calls in summer. Yeah? Winter, slips, trips, falls, car accidents. Summer, alcohol, then more alcohol, and then more alcohol. And we get more tourists coming to the capital, more people out and about. One of our busiest days is the first shopping day after Christmas, because people are out and about. When people are mobile, it creates work for the ambulance service. We've got people living longer, so we've got more people with long-term conditions. We have frequent callers, people who ring us 100 times a week, often with mental health problems. Yeah, we've got about 150 regular callers. We do a lot of work. We've got a frequent callers unit actually, and their job is to work with the social services, other parts of the NHS, to try and provide appropriate care. Often these people are lonely and they've got mental health problems, and they call us a lot. And we often are quite successful at moving some of those off there, and some more come onto our list of people who we attend regularly. Deprivation, you'll be all aware of that. There's a strong, very, very strong link between the use of the NHS and deprivation. Yeah? Whatever part of the NHS you look at in London, the it's a big issue. And we know that if you go on is it the Northern Line, one of the underground lines between Westminster and Hackney, you lose a year in life for each stop on the Jubilee line. Thank you. So the average age for a man in Westminster is 84, and it's something like 69, 70 in Hackney or Stratford. So there's a huge issue around deprivation and around life expectancy. Alcohol I've already mentioned, and of course changes to patient care. And what's not on there obviously is the two other things: obesity, which is a big thing, increasing a big thing. We've had to buy some bigger ambulances. And of course, when you go to the media and talk about that, this a headline, they came and talked to us, some of the media, and said, "We understand you're getting some new ambulances for patients who are bigger." That's right. And so the headline was, "LAS buys fat ambulances." You know, and so it's trying to get the story right, isn't it? About and finally, of course, we have social attitude change. People have got a lower threshold for calling an ambulance now. If you're 70 or 80, you will only call an ambulance if you're really sick. Yeah, generally speaking. If you're 25 or 30, who's bothered? I'm not paying for it. There's a completely different attitude now from society about the use of things. People are a lot more interested in themselves, perhaps. Slight sweeping statement. I've got 5 minutes. So alcohol, 1 in 20 of our calls have got some alcohol related. Whether it's a car accident, domestic violence, whether it's assaults, whether it's whatever it is, alcohol plays a huge part in our activity. Whether it's directly or indirectly. Falls, you name it, it's got a big part to play in our work. As you might expect, the number of people that use the ambulance service by age group as a population, you'd expect that trend to follow suit. You'd expect that the people who are 90 plus use the ambulance service a lot more than a 5-year-old. However, I find this is quite interesting. The number of actual calls by age group is very interesting, I think, because this is a little bit older, this slide now, but the biggest users of the ambulance service are the 20 to 30-year-olds, which is a surprise, isn't it? You think, actually, it would follow the same line as this. Actually, in this year, in fact, we should update this slide for more recent years, but I would expect the trend to follow, that the numbers of people calling the ambulance service is the biggest between the 20 to 30-year-olds, which goes back perhaps a little bit to the alcohol, a lot to the alcohol, and to social attitude generally. So, demand's rising. A small number of patients account for disproportionately large activity, some of our regular callers. Many of our patients go to hospital and they get discharged quickly, and people are used to getting quick treatment in the NHS now, these days. The fire brigade have been very successful, haven't they? The fire service in London and in England has done a fantastic job. Their public education campaigns, their powerful advertising, and their smoke alarm campaign has seen a dramatic reduction in house fires and general fires that they attend. But there is no equivalent in the NHS or the ambulance service to the smoke alarm, so there's no quick fix. And we did a Mori survey quite a couple of years ago now, but this looked at people, what do people want, what's the most important thing? It was in London, this is a London survey, about 1,000 Londoners, what do you expect of the ambulance service? Was there a surprise? Speed, speed, speed. There's an expectation that our staff will do a good job in treating patients. So they're not concerned about the treatment side because they expect us to do a good job when we get there. But what they're bothered about is speed. And that's it's interesting for our staff to be aware of that satisfaction comes from speed. Of course, looking after patients when you get there is important, but also the speed issue. When I was in New Zealand, I used to live over there, speed cameras are very, very common over there. They're everywhere. Backs of people's cars, not just on, and there's no notice about them. You get lots of people in the back of estate wagons, they're everywhere. And I had a doctor friend who worked in a hospital who used to drive quite quickly, often. And he often got speeding tickets. And he got sick of getting speeding tickets one time. And a brown envelope arrived. He was going to a meeting, and he was going too quickly. He was going, I think it was 100 k's in a 50 k area, so he was going about 20 miles an hour, 25 too fast. And a brown envelope arrived from the police, and it had in there a photograph of him and a $300 fine, £150 fine. And being the smart doctor that he was, and the fact he'd had so many speeding tickets, he decided to write the cheque out for $300, and he photographed the cheque. And he sent the photographed cheque back to the police. Not the cheque, the photograph of the cheque. And he didn't hear anything for about 6 weeks. And then about 6 weeks later, he got another letter, a brown envelope arrived, and he opened it up and it had a photograph of a pair of handcuffs on it. So it was good. Actually, that's a true story, by the way. Suffice to say, he did pay the fine. We tried this campaign a few years ago. This didn't go down very well because we got a lot of complaints, because our staff felt quite empowered to go to people's houses and say, we're not an ambulance, we're not a taxi service. And of course the patients got a little bit uptight about that. So it was quite a hard-hitting campaign, but it didn't actually reduce demand. This was another one we had. And in fact, there is some evidence overseas that by telling people you've got a service, you actually get more demand. Don't call, oh, I forgot about the ambulance service. They're pretty good, aren't they? Yeah, give them a call. So actually, it can have the reverse effect. And then specifically about London After Dark, we do have an increase, as you'd expect, and there's no real surprises on this list. We do get far more alcohol calls after dark. There's no doubt about that. We get more road accidents after dark. We get more people falling, tripping after dark. We get an increasing number of patients not found. They've absconded when we get there in the evenings. We get more staff assaults. Last year, I think 350 of our staff got assaulted in London. And we get far more abuse. And crucially, we have a lot of demand between 11 o'clock at night and 3 in the morning on a Thursday, Friday and Saturday night in particular, which is a big night. And in fact, Thursday is one of our busiest nights now. I mean, people say Thursday is the new Friday. Well, it feels like every night's Thursday night sometimes. But particularly on Thursday, Friday and Saturday night between midnight, 11 and 3 in the morning. And did the 24-hour licensing change? Not really. I think it took it a bit further in the evening. We used to be sort of 11 till 12, now it's 11 till 3, so it's spread it out a bit. But we do struggle between those hours on those nights. And of course our staff, trying to get as many staff to work in those hours is not always easy either, because it's a hard time to work. And of course, with the big estates we have in London, and just generally trying to find addresses is much harder for our staff. We can get there without satellite navigation, fine, but once you're in the street or at the estate, trying to find things can be quite problematic. And also, we have a lot of rough sleepers. We have people that sleep on buses, and they get on a bus, and these are often homeless people. They go back to the depot of the bus, and the bus driver gets out, and he finds someone on the back, or she finds someone on the back seat of the bus asleep, and then we get called. In fact, one bus station we've been called 300 times in 1 year to the same bus station. And we've been working with London Street Rescue, one of our paramedics, doing a great job, to try and spend time on the buses actually, and trying to find homes for some of the homeless people and generally educate them about calling the ambulance. So not been easy, but we do get more. There are homeless people. There's hypothermic people get cold middle of winter, middle of the night. So that's sort of what we do get. And it's not an easy job anyway in the capital at times. It's a rewarding job. It's a very rewarding job, and our staff, by and large, get treated very well by the public. But as you'd expect, there's always occasions when we do have problems with some of the public that we deal with. Nice picture, isn't it? So, I think the London Ambulance Service is a proud service. We've done a great job over the past 20, 30 years to look after the public in London. We've got an increasing level of demand. We keep getting there quickly. We need to manage our finances carefully over the next little while, because the NHS has got less cash, and we need to make sure that we are able to respond to that carefully and still provide the best care possible to the patients of London, while at the same time trying to change the way we run our service. Thank you very much.